Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Depressed and this is Langrisser Mobile Apex Season 14. Alright, so new season came in. There was no break between the end of last season and this season, and I definitely changed up the box quite a bit. I think some previous videos gave a little bit of a peek towards this box setup. I pretty much got the idea, or more or less copied the idea, from a YouTuber known as So. I believe they are a Korean player, at least from what I can tell from the when I did the translation for all of the descriptions and comments that there were. But essentially, NeoSo went with a 4-4 setup, 4 healers, 4 tanks, and the idea essentially is usually to pick a win condition in the beginning and not have to worry about tanks and healers. And I've been watching a lot of their matches, which tend to go pretty quick, and been kind of just watching how it's is gradually tweaked over time, and I've been kind of adapting my box to kind of work with it. There's one character that is not out yet that NeoSo uses, and is definitely a type of character I would love to try out, but unfortunately that character is not available yet. Probably not for another nearly 2 months, 1 to 2 months at least. So I'm kind of adapting what I can with that. Anyway. But the idea is essentially to take advantage of all the fancy AoEs, a little bit of assassination, some things to help mitigate opposing AoE, and then, as mentioned before, the 4-4 allows me to kind of pick the win condition. The only thing is I was a bit nervous about this because I'm not very good at reading a win condition, to be honest. But I'm hoping these placement matches will kind of give me a little bit of a much-needed experience. The only thing that I've noticed on some of NeoSo's videos is sometimes they do open with a healer, like grabbing Rose and Seal as soon as possible type situation. That's something I have not been able to put into practice yet, and it's something I should probably consider more often, especially with new characters such as SP Leon. Speaking of, SP Leon's now a thing. He is absolutely ridiculous with his... he puts out a bunch of demon fire terrain now. Supposedly the demon stuff is like all about like one of his like side stories where he's like fighting in hell with Bernhardt or something like that. Personally, while the kit itself is pretty impressive, the only thing I could think of when I saw this kit for SP Leon was, wow, that could have been great for Sonya, who's, an actual demon. But okay. Anyway, as for our opponent here, we're fighting against Tears. Has a bit of a mix, some healers, some faces we usually don't see, such as SP Grunier. Yeah, it's kind of a mixture of some rush strikers and some AoE. There's nothing really that stands out. I went ahead and opened getting rid of Rose and Seal. Obviously, the newest character to point out in this box is, of course, the Awakened. My Awakened is 5 stars. I can make her 6 stars with my my SSR shards, but I decided to go ahead and just see how she does with 5 and save my shards for a future character. Overall, the big thing to note about the Awakened is she's ridiculous. She has a lot of kill potential. She has a lot of support potential. She has access to things like teleport. She can swap places with people, including enemies. She has a global range debuff that is part of her talent. That's really good. Rose and Seal can sort of counter some of the Awaken's effects, so banning her first can be a pretty good thing to do. Because the only way you can really stop those Spellbound talents debuffs is with the Crystal Barrier, and you can't dispel it with heals. So yeah, I went and just went with that, and yeah, here we go. So my opponent bans Kyura first, so I'm guessing my opponent was concerned about assassinations. Go ahead and grab Sword and Light and Shadow. So my opponent only had 3 healers, and I opened with banning Rose and Seal, and since my opponent did not pick a healer, I went ahead and banned the remaining 2. Both of them would have been slightly annoying to deal with when I'm more AoE now. So my opponent has no heals. I went ahead and grabbed the Awakened. And one thing that opponents will tend to do when they see a 4-4 setup is they'll just start banning the DPS as quickly as possible, which will essentially force me in a situation where I'll either have 2 tanks or 2 healers and just only 2 DPS. which can be a bit dangerous. My opponent picks Polyol. At this point, I get rid of Christiane. Christiane's another first ban pick for this box, simply because I have so much magic damage, and Christiane's aura can reduce it by quite a bit. My second pick is Agnes. Agnes is Time Faction, which goes great with the Awakened. She also passively heals, provides self-reses, with a catch, of course, and then she also has extremely long-range AoEs. So she's actually a really good follow-up pick for the Awakened, and so I went with that. Nothing really to say here. My opponent's just going to be banning the rest of my my DPS as much as possible. Go ahead and grab Lightbringer at this point. Yeah, me banning Christiane forced my opponent to pick a tank or go without one. Personally, I was not that concerned about my opponent having a tank, as long as it wasn't Christiane or Landius. Landius can also be slightly an issue, because he has a similar aura as Christiane against ranged attacks and range AoE. And then I went ahead and just started banning the rest of the long-range DPS that kind of terrified me. At this point, I had yet to actually encounter a SP Leon, so I was a bit worried about him. I've seen the videos, at least. My opponent let me have Rose and Seal, so I was like, fine, I'll just take Rose and Seal. At this point, my opponent bans 2 of my tanks, so I have to pick one now. Out of the 2 remaining tanks, they're probably the least useful. Also, SP Matthew is a thing. Go ahead and ban. I was actually really surprised my opponent never bothered grabbing the Awakened. My guess is my opponent may actually have just a low star ranking Awakened and is just using her as a ban bait, possibly. For me, it wasn't a big deal. Because, yeah, low star Awakened is actually not very good. If it's 4 stars or lower, her attack range is reduced. And I think the cooldown for her talent becomes longer as well. So getting her up to 5 stars is pretty much required, because that ensures that she has 4 range as a base. Anyway, with my remaining tanks, Freya doesn't really buff anyone too much. And then Hilda here at least helps negate crits. One thing that Neoso's box has, though, as far as tanks are concerned, is all the tanks that can be cavalry are cavalry. So Christiane and Hilda would actually be cavalry class. I was not going to do that, so I was not going to swap over to that, and so we're just going to stick with what we have. So bans my tank, bans my healer, leaves me with 2 healers, including an act again, and they grab Wedham there. Alright, first match of the season. Alright, Sword and Light Shadow has AoE, 3C teleport. Wedham went single target along with his usual stuff. Matthew has strike, did bring his pet summon AoE thing, as well as this fancy little teleport slash thing. Actually, I think, yeah, his Sword Destruction, I think that's his 3C. And then he has his SP teleport AoE thing. Lightbringer here, nothing too special. Guardian Infantry, which honestly is not useful against my box since it's magic, but whatever. And then Polyol here went with Guardian Infantry and all the AoE stuff. Our box, or our side, has 3C Act Again. All my healer supports will have Shrine Maidens if they can use them. The Awakened here, I opted to bring Black Hole to have additional AoE. With her talent, she essentially has 5 range with her Black Hole, which is really good. As mentioned before, this Awakened one is 5 stars. Hilda here, pretty standard, brought both her guards, brought her faction buff, stuck with phalanxes for now. Agnes, Shrine Maidens, went with all of her AoEs and then her 3C. And then full heals for Rose and Seal here. So some of my healers can't get faction buffed, but that's not really that big of a deal. With Shrine Maidens, they should be able to at least survive a hit if necessary. Probably the things to point out, though, is Wedham did not bring flying troops, so he's going to be hindered by the terrain here. Matthew's also being hindered by the water terrain, because the mechanical knights don't actually help against that. The big thing here is seeing what Polyol will do, because Polyol is going to put out a bunch of terrain that'll speed up everyone else. And then, of course, with their ability to kind of rush forward and do a bunch of AoEs, immediately Sword and Light and Shadow can follow up. So that's something you have to be aware of. But with the amount of healing I have, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a matter of the follow-ups against the tank, because they do have tank busters. So yeah, as you can see, the faction buff only applies to Hilda herself. I'm kind of just inching forward a bit. Went ahead and did 3C. I did take a lot of time on these first few turns because honestly the turn order matters, because I only have 2 characters that can actually do damage. And the order that my opponent and where they move really matters. I did get pretty lucky with some Tenyu breezes here, which gives me a little bit flexibility as far as movement's concerned. One other thing was I wanted to move Awakened late to proc the talent. I wanted to apply Spellbound to targets that have already moved. That way it'll carry over for the next 2 rounds. Or at least the next 2 actions. Alright, got my cross formation up and running. I don't have guard buff up yet because I had to spin around doing faction buff. So I don't know what the point here was. So the big thing about Spellbound, not only does it reduce healing taken, but it makes it so any blocks moved beyond 2 costs an additional move. So this strike, which is supposed to only move 2 spaces, or sorry, only supposed to move 3 spaces, can only move 2. Now the reason why it can move a little bit further is because of the mechanical knights moving through this cargo terrain. But as you can see here, he can't really get very far. His teleport can go to here, and then I think the AoE goes to here. It doesn't really have much span. I think the only reason my opponent... It's either my opponent did not realize what Spellbound did, or the point here was just the cycle through the debuff, because the strike is going to make it so it goes away. Good news is, though, that pretty much tells me that my opponent can't reach me, so I went ahead and started pushing forward a bit more aggressively so I can get... The main goal here is to get Hilda forward to here. I'm right now within casting range of the Awaken, because that's just how ridiculous it is. One, because of her Tenyu breeze, but the other is because she has 5 range with her AoE. I could definitely had moved in and swapped places with Wedem, and then just insta-kill him with 3C, but then that'll leave her exposed to be killed, and then I won't be able to use her for a bit. But I decided to go ahead and just play it safe. My opponent doesn't have healers, so I can just kind of take my time here. So yeah, moves away there. So at this point, I go ahead and just do some Glow Hammer. I'm mainly just trying to see where my opponent moves, and that worked out. So yeah, moving Polyol forward a step was not a good move. It put her right in range for me to do Dark Hole and stay out of range of, or still stay in range of my tank. So yeah, Dark Hole applied a lot of debuffs. The significant one here is Polyols. She can't receive buffs, which means she can't receive buffs from her 3C, including the regen. Also, she's going to take 20% fixed damage, which is going to hurt her very badly. The rest of the debuffs I'm not that concerned about, though the mobility down for Wedem is probably hurtful. And then, one thing I did make a mistake on, I was originally planning on doing some swaps to try to get the positioning so I can do a follow-up with the Awakened one, again, with another AoE, using Act Again, but I messed that up. And to be honest, I didn't really need to do it. So I went ahead and did Act Again on Agnes. Her Glow Hammer's on cooldown, but her Ray is definitely up and running. So, bye-bye Matthew. Takes a life off of Polyol there. Something to note about Lightbringer is Lightbringer has a ton of magic defense, so even with the debuff, I'm still just kind of chipping away here. Actually, I think the debuff was applied from the Ray I just did. Anyway, one thing to note here, 19% health, 20% damage, max HP damage. So, can't be buffed. Just gonna dash in with this. I have Crystal Barrier, so I don't have to worry about debuffs, nor do I have to worry about stuns. So this is important because since she died, she can't be used as a teleport point for Sword and Lane Shadow. Also, Wedem's within 5 range, so I kind of went with that. It's possible that Sword and Light Shadow could have teleported here and then got a kill on the Awakened one here. Now, the neat thing about the Awakened one is her talent res is not a actual self-res. It's a weird portal cloning thing. So that means that the Decisive Blade wouldn't actually be able to negate it. It still wouldn't be able to negate it anyway because I have Crystal Barriers. But yeah, what makes the Awakened one so dangerous is her 3C. The meteors that come from it hit every target. It's randomized amongst all targets within the span. But if you happen to just only get one target within the area, it's essentially it focuses all meteors on the one target, and it pretty much is always a guaranteed kill. Even in her debuff state, when she comes back out through the portal, she can generally guarantee a kill with it. It's really, really strong. Also, if it hits a single target, its cooldown is reduced by 3 rounds, which means it just has a cooldown of 1. Furthermore, if she gets a kill, she gets to automatically refresh her Spellbound and immediately apply it again. Even more beyond that is every time she just uses her 3C, it automatically does a faction buff, reapplies the faction buff. It's such a powerful ability and very versatile. So yeah, do some Spellbound. So my opponent decided to just go ahead and use Lightbringer to attack, which actually is buying me time because now I can just move into guard range, which is what I did. One thing I did do though, because moving there did expose some of my characters. I went ahead and laid out this terrain here that prevents move again and act again. That way, if Sword and Light and Shadow happens to teleport here, she wouldn't be able to act again. Because if she teleported here and was able to act again, she could have just moved like here and maybe killed somebody. But actually, she wouldn't really have been able to do anything. She doesn't have a 2-range move besides her AoE. So honestly, there wasn't really any danger. Alright, teleported up. Some passive AoE. Did proc Thorns. Not that it really matters. She does have First Strike. Yep, nothing too special. At this point, it's pretty much guaranteed that my opponent does not have the ability to kill my tank. And since my opponent has no way of healing, I could just gradually whittle them down. Every time I use Glowhammer and it hits a target, it will actually do a cooldown reduction for a random target. Unfortunately, it got applied to Hilda, which she doesn't really need it. So I'm doing Dimensional Shift here just to get cycle cooldowns. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my 3C again. So the meteors are going to be randomized between the two of them, which is still enough to go ahead and take off a life from Sword and Light and Shadow. It also does a bunch of random debuffs, but Sword and Light and Shadow is currently immune. Get hit with the AoE. Oh, so she's using a Bloodthirster sword. Interesting. Yeah, that extremely high magic defense. Yeah, I did like no damage. Yeah, without the debuff, it's 1200. So yeah, AoEs are not doing too much to her, unfortunately. Yeah, this being my first match with this new box, I was definitely pretty thorough. Even though I had the advantage, I was just like, I need to make sure there's nothing that can go wrong. So that's why I'm throwing out all these heals and buffs and stuff that I don't really need at this point. Alright. So the fixed damage dot did a bunch of damage to her. And I was like, well, maybe Agnes can get a kill. But unfortunately, the Shrine Maidens are just so weak that she just doesn't get a kill. So decided to just do a normal attack with the Awakener to take off that life. Reapply the Spellbound. Dominate formation, really just to do some extra damage. Alright, act again. With this, my my cooldowns have cycled. So Black Hole. And that finishes off Sword and Light and Shadow, and at this point, my opponent is done. So yeah, 3 kills, 176,000 damage. The Awakened one is definitely pretty crazy. Alright, I do have a few more matches to show up, but I'm going to go ahead and split these onto their separate videos. So I am The Depressed Dealer. This is Langrisser Mobile Apex Season 14. I'll see you guys later.